So as discussed, we are all united in a passion to pave the way for others, because I believe what also really unifies us is that all of us had to go through challenging experiences that we would like to prevent for others. Yeah? And so it's about leading the way to showcase and make it easier for others to follow that suit, to go through it with more self-esteem, more confidence, more positive encouragement, and also more support from all of us. And maybe since you just opened, Caroline, first question to you maybe. What needs to happen that we're talking about future-oriented organizations in the year 2050? This kind of diversity is really becoming the norm.
Yeah. I mean, modern leadership is all about how you manage human resources. When I started my career, I thought that management was about direction setting, and I had a very simplistic attitude that there were high performers and low performers. So you should avoid employing low performers, and you're constantly seeking the norm. I failed to understand back then that you, an employer, are actually responsible for the culture and see how you can seek the best out of people. So, I mean, modern organizations, and especially in 2050, needs to be very clear on how do you really get the most out of people. How do you make people, the people you hire, do their best? Because you as an employer are responsible for the culture. You as an employer need to figure out how to make people thrive, and not to sort of point with your whole hand.
So from your experience, what are great examples on how organizations can encourage exactly this kind of inclusive leadership, inclusive mindset, inclusive culture?
I mean, you need to see yourself if you're a manager. My role is to make the people I have in my unit to actually thrive and seek to understand what is it they need. Some people may need flexibility in terms of work hours or working from home, and some people need strong encouragement, and some people actually need office presence. Some people need variation in the tasks or whatever. You need as a manager to be very human oriented and understand people. That's how you become a good people leader.
And I think as you're one of the few people who have seen both sides as the privileged male. Now, you want to say?
Yeah. Well, yes, they're definitely different sides, but at the same time, I don't want us to be stereotypical and say that white males are one category and all the women are another category. Yes, there are norms, and some of those norms are very, very much tied to gender structures. But if you want to be a good leader, you need to understand that everyone is truly unique, and you need to have a very unique approach to every individual. You need to know everyone in your team about their uniquenesses and how they differ from one another, because we are unique individuals. It's not something to say, it's not a bullshit saying. That's a fact, and you as a manager need to understand that.
No, absolutely. What surprised you most, being perceived as a male leader versus as a female leader? You already mentioned some examples of really people opening up to you, women opening up to you.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I started to live as Caroline, people asked me, and also media asked me, will you now have a female leadership style? And I said, of course not. I mean, my leadership style is a consequence of my experiences and values in life. It doesn't change by gender, but the questions kept coming. Then I understood that people around me put expectations on how a male leader behaves and how a female leader behaves, and that influences us unconsciously. For example, you might think that, in this position we need to recruit someone who's very strong and forceful. Implicitly, you might think, therefore, we need to recruit a man. Or, this is a very soft area, you need to be good with people, therefore, we probably need to recruit a woman. That's very easy to fall into that trap. And I understand that that's unconscious bias, where you fail to understand how we differ as individuals, but rather assume that you behave in a certain way a certain character. So my biggest surprise is that people would assume that I will now behave differently simply because of another gender expression.
Yeah, I can imagine this fitting into the roles that people would expect of you to behave, right? From roles to some research. So Google did big research on psychological safety, which is a core for high-performing teams. Psychological safety elements are also really important to be brought to life in companies in order for people to bring their best selves to work and also work in the best possible way. So maybe to all of you, what are good examples to foster and encourage psychological safety within an organization?
First of all, wow. So it's not easy to speak after you, but I try and give my best. Well, I come from NPAL, which is a fast-growing energy startup. There is one more energy startup here. It's Solar. Sarah Müller is you're also here, I imagine? No, not anymore.
Solar already.
No?
Yeah.
Solar. But I come from NPAL, and we are now growing by 1,000% within 2 years. And so you need something like psychological safety a lot, because it's super fast and it's we work hard and things change all the time. And there's lots of pressure on it to manage that fast growth. And then leadership comes in. And I think what we in Germany often say, oh, we need Fehlerkultur, we need some mistake culture. But that's just a word. Because when you make mistakes, then often it is like, oh, you made a mistake. So you're a poor example of working culture. And what our founder, Mario Kohle, always says to everyone who starts is, you can make mistakes, because the mistakes you make cannot be as big as the mistakes I made, because my mistakes, they cost us millions. So your mistakes are little compared to what I did wrong. But the important thing is not to cover it up. If someone says, oh, that's my mistake, then it's forgotten and forgiven. And we start to improve the processes to make it better and to not make the same mistake twice. But if you cover it up, then you cannot learn from it. And then you get problems. And I think that's also important to foster psychological safety in a company, to be allowed to make mistakes, but not cover it up.
Super important. Also for families, by the way. Yeah. Start very early with my kids, not covering up whatever they do. So there's hopefully a nice full transfers in their trajectory. Yeah. How about you, Vincent?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me on this panel. I do want to say to Caroline's story that I really want to commend you for sharing such a personal story with all of us. And I think it is really important. And I have had the pleasure of serving with Caroline last year on the G7 States Gender Equality Advisory Council. And I can attest, you're not just authentic, you're not just successful, you're also deeply empathetic, you're a very warm individual. And that makes, I really mean it, that makes a tremendous leader, a real role model, and we need much more people like you. So it's really a joy to be here with you. Thank you so much. Yeah. To your question on safety, so the topic I'm interested in is male allyship for gender equality. And I would say, really, in any given company, the biggest lack of safety you can find is regarding women. To some degree, it is regarding physical safety when you talk about sexual harassment at the workplace, but to a much bigger degree, it is regarding what maybe the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu would call symbolic violence, so non-physical violence, but that acts through small acts of degrading, through discrimination, through sexist jokes, through interrupting in meetings, and so on and so forth, to maintain a patriarchal system in the company and in our society. And so when we talk about creating cultures of safety at the workplace, we have to start with male allyship. Because as long as men pretend, or maybe even think that this problem doesn't exist, that really, from my experience talking with women, talking with queer people, touches almost every single female or queer life at any company you could find. As long cis men like myself think there is no problem and they do not become part of the solution, safety will continue to be an issue at any single company. And what we see when I say we, I mean my colleague Martin and I, we do a lot of consulting on male allyship. So we go into companies, we do what we call all male safe spaces, where we like often bring men from leadership and we kind of let them vent all their anger, all their frustration about gender equality. It's quite interesting to see what happens once the door closes and they're just amongst guys. But what we're seeing is there's such a lack of understanding of the problem that a lot of men just really don't get the depth, the severity, the scope of structural sexism. And I'm not making excuses for men here. I think a lot of men hesitate or even outright refuse to understand the problem, to do the homework, to listen to women, to listen to queer people, to really come on board, to do self-reflecting on our own behavior. Every single man you have ever met will have made sexist joke in his lifetime. So there is no man who has never been sexist. It doesn't exist. So this is very important for us men to do this self-reflecting, to recognize when we have been wrong, sometimes every single day, and become allies. And that is a real role model. Unfortunately, we don't see that many of those kind of cis man role models yet, particularly, I think, because they don't understand the problem. But that's what we are working towards, I guess. And just maybe last point, I'm already talking too long here. This is not in my opinion, this is a male allied job to engage other men on the topic. It's not a women's job to educate men, to tell them the problem, to tell them you have to help us. It is on us men, the few men here in this room who probably already act as allies on at least some of the days, to really work with other men, to be like, hey, this joke is not okay. You got to be open to this. You got to consider parental leave. You got to consider part-time work and all these kind of things. I'm talking too much, so I'm sorry it's a long answer to your question, but I think that...
And I think it's really important examples, right? And it starts with small things, such as whether it's encouraging parental leaves, whether it's enabling part-time, whether it's not only showcasing that also tandems can work in mixed teams, for example, or in male teams. I'm not sure we have male tandem teams yet in leadership position. If someone knows someone, please let me know. I often see women showcased a lot. I believe that men could also be very great tandem leaders. So I think there's really a lot of individual steps that can be taken by organizations. And also important to embrace male allyship trainings or also engage in consultancy with you, for example, to also really help men reflect on the situation that they are actually in and that they are probably unconsciously causing for others around them in their work environment. Yeah. Any other examples you would like to
I remember back in the days as a man, it's not normative as a man in business to display weakness. It's very normative for men to always project strength, even among men. And for example, I remember 18 years ago, my wife and I thought that we wouldn't be able to have children because when our third IVF attempt failed, we were lucky on the fourth attempt. But after our third attempt, we were very, very much in despair. And I had a personal crisis myself because I thought that maybe I wouldn't become a father. But I said, that is a personal issue. You don't bring that to work because after all, I should always project strength. So I didn't say it at work. After a week, my boss took me into his office and said, is there something going on in your life because you're not treating people well around you? And then I realized I wasn't able to handle it. I let it flow over. So I walked around the office and made excuses and explained the situation. I was very open over the very difficult period my wife and I went through. And from then on, and I promised myself to always try to bring my whole self to work, to display myself as much as an authentic person as possible. Because if I, especially as a manager, allow myself to say that I have problems, there are issues in my life, I also invite others to be open about themselves, and we can have much more authentic conversations with colleagues, and which creates psychological safety.
No, I really want to underline that point, and that's such a good example of the importance of role models, really, because what we often see in companies, for example, parental leave, is men being afraid to ask for parental leave, even though they want to take it. Studies show most men would like to spend equal time with their kids and in comparison to their female partners, but still they don't ask for it. And that is the interesting question. Why don't they ask? Part of it is there's a big fear of financial repercussions, but there's also a big fear of being seen as unmanly by asking your male boss for a parental leave.
Yes.
So when a male boss, or really any person in leadership, but particularly men, set this example, show themselves maybe also as vulnerable, which I think is so important, but really like openly communicate. I like when guys in this company take parental leave. I will help you come back into the, when you come back after 7 months, I will help to reintegrate you. I appreciate when men take part-time. Kind of think of men sometimes as a wolf pack, right? And if the alpha wolf says parental leave is cool, the rest of the wolf pack will also say parental leave is cool. Yes. But not before. If the alpha male says this is unmanly, and so that's why leadership or role models are so important. And it's so frustrating because so many men in private, they say, well, parental leave or gender equality is so important. But when it comes to openly speaking about it, they don't do it, right? And this is really frustrating, but it's so needed that men, in particular cis men, speak up about this and say parental leave is great, gender equality is great, you can be a feminist and a cool, successful guy, no problem. But that's what we need in leadership.
When my twins were born 17 years ago, I was deeply afraid that my wife would actually ask me to take some parental leave, because no one had done it at my executive level, because I had already reached an executive position back then. And no one had done it. And I genuinely thought that if I would take parental leave, someone else would be sitting in my chair when I came back. And that would hurt my ego. That would likely be financial repercussions, as you say. So I was very relieved when my wife finally said, I'm actually willing to take the whole period. And then ultimately she became a housewife, which was very relieving for me. I'm ashamed today, I wasn't stronger back then, but I was fearing because no other man had done it, exactly as you say.
Sometimes those men, Vincent and you are talking about, they quit their jobs and they come to startups. Because what I see is like colleagues of mine, they come from law firms, they come from consultancy firms, and now they say, oh, Empal is so cool, it's a startup, I can go home at 4 o'clock to pick up my kids from kindergarten. And when I have a video call, I can sit there with my kid, which I was not allowed to, working with my clients in my law firm, in my consultancy firm, and they are super happy, even though they work still long hours. But now they can be fathers as well. And I think that's the other coin, because when we want more women and strengthen them in the workforce, then the other side of the coin is making men better fathers.
That is workers of the future. Very good example.
Something that I love about Google on that is that every woman gets 6 months full paid maternity leave, but also every man gets 4 months full paid paternity leave. So the question between the men who are super excited to become their first child, second child, etc., is not on are you taking parental leave, but so when are you taking parental leave? Are you dividing it? How are you doing it? Taking it all at once? But it's really completely changing the discussion. And that's a big change to what I experienced 10 years ago when my husband also didn't dare take parental leave himself. So that's also something how organizations can really encourage it. And I think it is a benefit for society, not only for the individual person, but also really for society to have this again become the norm.
There are actually companies in Sweden who have taken that one step further. They're actually giving a bonus to those employees who split the parental leave 50-50. Then they get a financial bonus from the employer.
So many ways to encourage that. Speaking about strong men and expectations, Vincent, in your research, you look a lot at male allyship, how it can be done. So how do other men react when you tell them what you actually do for a living?
I mean, there is a lot of surprise, I guess. It's unfortunate. I mean, it really is unfortunate. I really wish it wasn't the case. And what we are offering really is quite unique in Germany. I wish it was different. I think that there's much more need for it. And what we see in our work is there's such big demand to talk about these topics, because every person, male, female, queer, has opinions on gender equality, every single one. And when you look at the men, there's a lot of hidden frustrations, anxieties, opposition to it, and you need to have spaces to let this out and to really, to kind of also moderate it, put it into perspective. A lot of men, for example, we see this time and again when we go, right now we have done a lot of these safe spaces with banks, and there's always like, well, as a guy, I'm never getting promoted again. And then when we look at the actual numbers, that's not true. A lot of men get promoted, but the fear is so clear. So these guys are convinced they're not going to get promoted. So you got to get at those fears. You got to get them out and kind of provide a forum in which we can talk amongst men, but also what we do is in mixed groups. And that's fascinating to really see how such a group grows. And it's interesting because often we ask in those groups, what is the one thing you most wish from members of the opposite sex? And it's not complicated answers. It is empathy, listen to us, respectful dialogue, communication. These are deeply human abilities. We all have the ability to do that. We can be empathetic, we can talk, we can listen, we can believe. So gender equality, of course, it's a structure, it's patriarchy grown over centuries, but at the core is a lack of conversation, a lack particularly on the side of men to listen to women, to queer people, to believe them when they tell us about sexism. And so that's kind of what we see when we go into these organizations, and it's really fulfilling work. It's also sometimes, sometimes we work with groups and their guys were like, yeah, I want to be an ally. How can I get started? And other groups just flat out deny the problem. So this big range of what we're seeing. But I think we just need to talk about so much more because a lot of men, they have all these worries. Can I flirt anymore? Can I ask this? Can I do anything? And we need to find forums, organized forums in which we can talk about this. Otherwise, the opposition is there. We might not see it, but it is there. And men will torpedo any attempt at bringing about gender equality if we do not somehow engage them. I'm not trying to make excuses, but I think that is an important factor of moving forward.
I can totally empathize with that.
And since you already touched on the wolf pack earlier, so how can anyone here help crack the alpha wolf and actually turn that alpha wolf into the best possible role model for male allyship?
I have to ask you, what would have worked when you were a male CEO? What would have been the best argument to convince you?
I mean, appealing to my ego, because that was the one thing that mattered. Because genuinely, this thing about gender equality, that was threatening. I mean, my wife, she used to be union representative. She tried to talk to me around these issues. I genuinely believed we have an equal playing field, and all the differences in gender structures on top was the outcome of people making free choices, and people should make free choices, right? And then the thing about quotas and stuff came along. I genuinely felt threatened because I knew I have a dual university degree, 6 years, McKinsey, so many more hours. No one should take away from me my position that I truly deserve, that I worked so hard for. It felt genuinely deep in my ego. So the way I approach men when I talk to senior executive teams, paradoxically I come across as being slightly more trustworthy when I talk to men about these issues simply because of my background. I mean, it's a paradox, but as is, I essentially say you mismanage can be even more successful in your management role if you become better at this thing about diversity, inclusion, etc. Because then you're talking the language of appeasing their ego, as opposed to you should do this and that so that the other people can be more included. Because ethical arguments, sustainability arguments, etc., won't move such an alpha male. Appeasing his ego would.
If I could make a wish.
Please.
Yeah. So at NPAL, we have quite a male-dominated leadership as well. So that's how it is. Please forgive us for that. It's a bit more diverse than it looks at first glance, because when you account for working class background or immigration background, then it's more diverse than it looks at first glance, but still it's a very weak point of our leadership in our company that we have not enough women leaders in our team. So appealing to the ego, I learned now. So if you have more advice for us, let me know. Send me an email. I mean, it's there now. We can change it so fast. Yeah. But if you have more tips, you can reach me via email and Facebook and LinkedIn and WhatsApp. So just let me know. I would be very thankful.
But to build on that, never ever accuse a man, because then he will go wall up, because then he will feel threatened. So when I do keynote about this, I blame myself for having been so ignorant. I never ever say about men in general, but rather say I'm ashamed that I've been so ignorant, and now I've been much more successful in my leadership when I have learned this. Because the men can choose themselves if they want to appeal. I mean, last Monday I did a keynote at Bosch in Stuttgart, and after that, one of the male board members of Vorstandsmitglied came forward and said, "That was the most wonderful I heard. May I have a picture with you so that I could put it on LinkedIn?" And when he described on LinkedIn what he had learned, I mean, it was a doctor, Vorstandsmitglied at Bosch, everything. That is because I never ever accuse men, but rather appease the ego, see how they can be more successful.
Maybe also one more learning, because by training I'm a social scientist and I'm also a climate activist. And what we learned from research, how to change the mindset of conservative men is through their daughters. So changing conservative women through their sons doesn't work, but changing the minds of conservative fathers, that works through their daughters, not from the sons, just from the daughters. So if you bring climate change as an issue to schools, and then the daughters would bring that home to the parents, then fathers all of a sudden start to change their mindset about climate protection. And they kind of soften up, so to speak. And maybe that's also an approach we could take.
I've heard this too. I have to say I'm always a little ambivalent about that, because I think it's so unfortunate that a lot of men only understand the problem once they have daughters. It is unfortunate, but this happens all the time in our talks. It's like, oh, I have a daughter, and she told me, and I'm like mind blown what actually happens.
It's also a good excuse.
It is the wildest thing. But I think what's at the core of that is one proven method, and it's hard to find methods. It's not easy to convince men who have a lot of privilege and who don't want to acknowledge it. It's really difficult to convince them. But one path that we have found that works is personal connection to the problem. So that, for example, means we do this when we do these safe spaces. We collect at the company that we work with examples of workplace harassment, usually in an anonymous way. So we don't even know who has had these experiences. But essentially, we have a PowerPoint presentation. There are written examples of workplace sexism, jokes, sometimes worse. And we show that at some point. So we open the safe space and the guys get to talk for an hour and vent and all that. And then we bring in those examples. And there's a palpable silence in the room every single time. It's just, we let them read it. We don't read it for them. They just have to confront it themselves. And there's always, oh, I thought we were further along. There's just this big surprise. And that's similar to the daughter angle, in that you need to show men the problem doesn't just exist in another company, in another country, in another part of town. It exists to your own colleagues who you know and value. And that, unfortunately, has to happen sometimes. I wish just empathy was so big that it would be like, statistics are enough, right? We see the statistic, that's all we need. But often people need this personal connection to the problem.
What's in it for you yourself?
Yeah, plus one on that. Touching into another topic which we didn't really tap into yet, which is a bit of more diversity also in terms of backgrounds. Yeah? So still today in Germany, social advancement is linked to money, is linked to access to the right universities, having the universities funded by the parents or whomever to do the right internships, to do the right international experience, to also do social engagement ideally, and graduating from a top university to also land one of the top jobs. This is still how hiring in most of the top companies actually works. And it's really, really difficult for people who are busy struggling, getting a decent diploma, because they don't have these kind of resources to also really land that kind of job. So what also needs to happen, maybe question to you first, Wolfgang, since this is one of your passion topics. What needs to happen here that we also have more role models in the future here?
Have you heard of the Stanford marshmallow experiment? No? Yes, a few did. So in 1972, researchers at Stanford University gave kids a marshmallow and promised them a second marshmallow if they didn't eat the first marshmallow for 15 minutes. And then they stopped the time. 10 years later, they checked for the children how they developed over time. Their school records, education, even their body mass index and other indicators. And they found out the children who could wait for 15 minutes for that marshmallow, they just performed better on all indicators. So the narrative now that came out of here is, oh, you just have to have enough willpower, and then you can make it. So hard work, performance can achieve everything. But that narrative is a lie, because what the researchers missed at the time was checking for the social background. And kids from poorer households, they couldn't wait for the second marshmallow, because what they learned, how they grew up, is scarcity. So everything is scarce, there is a lack of resources, lack of money, lack of marshmallows, if you will. And that's a learning. And so we have to kill that narrative that only hard work leads to performance or to success in life. Because people who are poor, they work hard, but they don't get anything for it. They don't get the second marshmallow. Otherwise, my mom would be a rich person, and my brother too, but they aren't. Yeah, and most of the people I know who are rich, they were rich before they started to work even. So it's a bit different. And I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge that being poor is not a lack of character, it's just a lack of money, and that we have to... And then what follows out of it is low performers are often low performers because they are just poor. And everyone would be a low performer if she or he would be poor. But if you grow up in a working class household, then you know what it is, what it feels like to not enjoy privileges, to work hard. And that's why if I would be in HR, I would hire working class kids because they work hard and they have a working ethics and they are not entitled to privileges. And I think they are the better, maybe they're a better workforce because they don't bullshit around. They don't say, oh, I can do this, I can do everything, I'm good, I'm the best. They just work hard. And then out of this fear to not perform, they perform even better than everyone else.
So it's also really a pivot from going away from we recruit the top 5 universities and rather for capabilities, for skills, mindset,
and I mean,
character.
It's not like governments can do a lot about it, about checking for social backgrounds, etc. But it is a cultural issue, a lot. And so we have to learn to see the invisible, because like you cannot see if someone is poor, maybe from how he or she behaves, how the haircut is, the dress, whatever. But you have to take into account that often you cannot see the social background of someone.
So looking at the time also, maybe last question to all of you. So while preparing this panel at my laptop, I was playing around with our Google artificial intelligence tool Bard, as in the poet, the singer. And I asked Bard, what are traits of great role models? And I just loved the answer, so I'll read that to you. And then I would like to hear from you what kind of characteristics, attributes Bard might have missed. What kind of attributes, characteristics do role models of the future really need to have? So Bard told me, a great role model is someone who inspires others to be their best selves. They are positive, supportive, and always willing to help. They set a good example for others to follow. Here are some qualities that make great role models: positive attitude, empathy, supportive, honest, and ethical. So these 5 is what Bard is already encouraging and predicting. What are your additions to that?
I would say being value-based, because I admire leaders who are very overt about what their values are, and I can predict almost their behavior in certain situations because they are very transparent about what their values are. And those values are, I mean, humane and ethical, of course, but most of all, they have an inner compass on how to do things that is not about their own ego, but for the greater good.
Make it easy to follow and appreciate your first follower, because leadership is overrated. It's the first follower who counts, because then there is no followers for the leader. He would be all alone. He would be only one wolf and not a wolf pack. So if you want to be a leader, then appreciate your followers.
And Simon Sinek also likes to say, don't create followers, create more leaders. So that's what good leadership is about, creating even more good leaders.
Not a quality that I can say I've mastered at all, but humility. I think humility and willingness to serve. That's at least what I admire in leaders. And, yeah.
Perfect. So I think we have a few more minutes for questions. Yeah, questions. And in the meantime, maybe later at coffee, we can also still reflect on how we actually train these traits, because all of these are not capabilities, they're not skills. They are characteristics, they're a mindset. So that is really also interesting on how to really form future leaders bearing all these traits in common. Is there anyone who would have a question to Vincent, Caroline, Wolfgang? Anything you would still like to know? I think we have two people with mics running around, so just raise your hand.
Hi. Carolyn, thank you so much for sharing your story. You said that you were really welcomed by your family and also by your company.
Yeah.
But it strikes me as there must have been some negative comments and experiences. What have you been fighting through this time? You said that was really hard 1 year.
I mean, the fight was with myself, because the coming out process of an LGBTQ person that I got to know is all about first of all, overcoming your own homophobia, transphobia, or whatever it is you're coming out as, and also living in parallel lives, and also fearing that for some reason I would not be supported. But yes, I mean, I'm very happy that I'm still married to my wife. That is very uncommon if someone goes through a gender transition, but we managed to pull it through great communication and accommodation to one another's needs. Yes, my kids are totally cool about it. I'm still their father, which was their choice of label. And yes, if you look, I mean, in my autobiography, my subtitle is Businesswoman and Family Father. And in my Instagram profile, there's a wife and father. If someone has a problem with that, it certainly is not my problem. but yes, I probably live in the most progressive part of the world around this. So I've not been met with any negative comments locally. Of course, globally, yes. I mean, 3 weeks ago, I was on BBC World Service and reaching an audience of 140 million. Of course, my Twitter account went mayhem. But you know what? I really don't care. But it's better that those comments are directed towards someone who can handle them, and I can handle them, and so that people who are less fortunate can have a chance of living their lives.
Then thank you all for talking and really giving, I think, some really, really good inspiration nuggets that all of us can reflect on, and hopefully also take them into our organizations to help pave the ways for others. Thanks a lot for listening, and thanks a lot for, alongside with these wonderful personalities, paving the way and making it easier for others to follow. Stronger together.